Oh, hi, Amber. I didn't see you there. What's up?
Hey, Jamie, how you doing?
I'm
Imagine
doing it.
running into you on your channel. How weird is that?
I know. It's crazy.
It is
So what are you up
fantastic.
to?
I am not doing anything. We didn't make any plans at all for New Year's Eve. We're doing the same nothing that we did for Christmas for New Year's Eve. But then I got bored because I'm just sitting there, I've been reading and just doing not like break stuff all day long, and I was getting tired of doing that. But my husband was just playing video games, and I really got tired of watching that really really quickly. So so I've sent you a message, and I'm like, hey, you want a live stream? I'm bored. So here we are.
Here, we'll play paper, rock, scissors. You just tell me what you choose. Okay.
Okay, I'll close
1,
my eyes so I don't
2,
see
go.
rock.
I won.
Oh, you win.
Paper.
Okay.
See. One more.
Yeah. Scissors.
Oh, we tied. Scissors too. Okay. Well, I am gonna open it up so all the cool kids can join, but just not quite yet. I don't know. We're gonna talk about something here. I got someone coming in probably in a minute. He's just landing the plane here. No, let's see who's out there. Richard, the Lutheran, my Lutheran friend. We got Mike, the Hebrew root. We got CJ, the Calvinist. What's up? Let's see. That's all I see. You'll have to say hi if there's somebody else out there. So let's see. Let's see. Present the Bible. Oh, we're gonna touch on something. What was it again? You brought something up, and I wanted to talk about it. We saved it for now, right? What was it?
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking because I was thinking about doing a live stream on Friday or Thursday talking about hope in the Old Testament. And but since I promised a friend I'd watch his debate, then I realized I couldn't do that. So I was like, hey, let's just off the top of our heads, just as best as we can, shoot from the hip and talk about hope in the Old Testament. So, because I thought it would be kind of fun talking about, I was always down for talking about Old Testament stuff because that's my favorite thing. But I'm going to put this over here. I'm going to pull up. Hang on. I want to do.
Yeah.
Let's see. You all like which heretical version of the Bible? I keep forgetting.
I like them all. I like the NASB and I like the KJV and I like the New King James. I prefer the New King James, but I don't really care.
Okay.
I don't. Well, no, I don't really care at all. I really don't like the NIV in some places, and I don't like the RSV in some places, but they have their advantages.
They all have their advantages and they all have their downsides. I mean, it's just I'm going to search. So, Jamie, while I'm searching for what I'm looking for, why don't you tell me what you think about where do you think hope shows up in the Old Testament? Talk to me about that.
Let's see. Well, the first place I see hope is in Genesis, obviously, but like the more difficult stuff, not sure. I would probably say seems like there's hope when God sends Moses to Pharaoh, but I'm going to be like a really layman on this, so I would just nothing. What we could say when. Can you hear that?
Just a little bit. I don't know what it is, but it's okay.
They're having a good time out there, I guess. Let's see, let me think about that for a minute. Jacob's ladder seems like maybe there's some hope in there, maybe. I know I'm not thinking of any good ones. I mean, I would say that in the Judges, like God's faithfulness during the period of the Judges seems like he's putting up with a lot of crap. I know you got better ones than that.
Well, I'm looking at, okay, so I just decided I'm going to do a word study really quick. And I'm going to just do a word search for hope and limit to the Old Testament. And then I'm going to look that up in Hebrew and see. Okay. And the word tikva is the word for hope. And It is so the first, let's see, depending on the translator, the first place that that word tikva shows up is most of the time Ruth chapter 1, although it shows up. Oh, okay. Interesting. So the word tikva, the first time that hope word tikva shows up is Ruth chapter 1, verse 12. It's the first time the word hope shows up. That's not the first time the theme of hope shows up, but the first time the word shows up in Hebrew is, let me check. Because that's looking in let's look at Hollet and see what Hollet says. Yeah, so yep. The first time that appears in the Hebrew Bible, the word hope is in Ruth, which is interesting because that's one of my favorite words, but it means expectation is the first meaning of that word and hope is the second. I wonder if what for translation for expectation and where it shows up. If it shows up before that, let's see. Sorry, this takes a minute. Sometimes looking things up in Hebrew takes a minute. Yeah, same thing. The first Ruth is the earliest use of the word in the Old Testament, which is fascinating because that really makes me wonder now. I'm going to have to go do I'm going to have to go do a thematic study on this now. Now I'm intrigued because hope shows up in Genesis chapter 1 thematically. And
where?
Well, you're not going to word, but as a theme in Genesis chapter 1. So let's just do that. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Okay. So, let's get rid of that. I need to get rid of that here. Okay. Genesis chapter 1. What version do I have open? I don't even know. I have to look. I'm looking at the NET right now. The NET with the notes is very good when you're trying to work out and figure out how translators pick the words that they pick. And the notes in the NAT will go into some of those choices when they picked what word or why a certain thing was added or why something was left out. They will discuss all of that in those notes. So I highly recommend to everybody to get your hands on a copy of the notes for the NET Bible. Because
new English
New English translation. Yeah, New English translation. And you can get it. Well, Logos has it too, so you can add it to your Logos, and then you just hold over the little letter, and you can pull up the notes and you can sync it so that as you're reading the text, you can see the notes with it. And it's really interesting because it talks about the translation choices that they make in each verse for different words, and they'll flag things when there's like when there's disagreements between the scrolls and the Masoretic text, and they'll point some of those things out. And that's a good place to look for beginners to make it really understandable is the notes that go with the New English translation. I'm a huge fan. I love it. I use them all the time.
Oh, and just for the quick moment here, let's see.
That's perfect. Hey.
What's up, old man?
Are you saying I bombed every place I go? Thanks.
You the bomb.
You the bomb.
The bomb.
Hey, boss, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good. We got bored, so we decided to do this.
Oh, that's why you invited me. Okay, appreciate you.
Because you make the party better. That's why.
No American Baptist ever makes a party better.
No, y'all make the best potato salad on the planet. I just have
and the
to
best
say.
barbecue.
Our potlucks are all tofu and no.
Yeah, that's the cooperative Baptist, but be nice.
You guys do potlucks?
Of course we do. We're Baptist. Baptist is Greek for we feed you after the service.
Okay.
Boss was there at my church. Did we not feed everyone at the once the service
They
was
did.
over?
It was. Everybody brought stuff, and we all sat around and had really, really good potato salad. I have to like wholly endorse Baptist potato salad because that was good stuff. And yeah, they had some other stuff, and just
Like
sat
got
around and
bacon bits in
chatted.
it.
And it was. I don't remember actually. It was really
Okay.
good though. I don't know. It was really, really good. But
If we can't
so
make it, we know where to buy it.
that's awesome. That's also true. But it was good. It was really fun. I did have a really fun time at Nick's church. So yeah, Nick, we're looking at the idea of hope in the Old Testament just because it sounded like fun, because I'm an Old Testament nerd and I like to do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but interestingly enough, the word itself for hope, tikwa, doesn't show up until the book of Ruth. And so,
Isn't that interesting?
mhm. But thematically, we're going to jump into thematically. It starts in Genesis 1, the idea of hope itself, because there is hope in creation, and just the very act of creation itself, I think, starts the theme of hope. And the way that the story plays out, I think, as you're going through with, whoops, I'm getting ahead of myself, not Genesis chapter 2, Genesis chapter 1. Okay. As you're creating space and filling space, there is an open potential that is filled with something that is declared good. And that in and of itself, I think, creates the beginning of hope, because it is the establishing and the beginning of a cycle of perpetuating goodness, which I think is hope. And then you also get this, we're going to bleed into a little bit of Genesis 2 with the first 3 verses where you get through the Sabbath, right? So yeah, Jamie always perks up when somebody says Sabbath. It's kind of funny. Like
Squirrel.
Sabbath, squirrel, exactly. but you also see this pattern that is established of God wanting to bless and God creating out of love. And that's a theme that's going to repeat all the way through, as after the fall, God's story in the narrative of the Bible is wanting to redeem his creation back into relationship with himself, which is a reflection of the imagery from the story of Genesis 1. So it is not just the story of the beginning, it is the hope of the restoration at the end and the final day of the Lord. So you have a beautiful picture, not just of the care and the love, the blessing went into the initial creation. It's an echo of the final day of the Lord and the recreation and the redemption and restoration and reconciliation that's coming. It's echoed from chapter 1 in Genesis. At least I think. But
Well, and if you
what do y'all
add
think?
priesthood into that too, the
Mhm.
reconstitution, or, I mean, if before the fall at least, priesthood was seen more as something that needed to be fulfilled, right? Like we were
Mhm.
both male and female in the image of God, priests of God in the world, so to speak, and doing all those things. And so it's the joke is we have creation. It's not that creation is incomplete. That's not the right term, but creation is, well, it's wild. It's a
Mhm.
wild garden. And just because God says it was good doesn't mean we were gifted the keys to a car. It's like, nope, God wanted us to actually bear his image in the world. And so if you put priesthood in with that and representation of God and working together in the garden together to make all things as they had a telos or a goal or a purpose or a hope that God, what it would be, you have a beautiful image. And then of course, the fall or the curse or whatever we want to call it happened. And while priesthood and lives get marred, it doesn't mean the vocation stops. In fact, I think the vocation is now intensified. And that's where I think hope kind of is fully formed in that is hope in two different settings is still hope, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, well, and I want to nuance a little, just a little bit of that. Sorry. So when I say that, like, the cycles of complete and incomplete, that doesn't always mean um, unfinished. That means that it's still the idea is it's like not at the beginning of a cycle that's moving forward towards the fullness that it's supposed to be. So it's not like, it's more like you're not finished with the puzzle yet. You're just, it's this idea of you take a 2D image and make it 4K, I guess is kind of, there's a lot more of refining and amplifying that can be used in the imagery there. And it can go either way. It can be not finished yet, but it can also be the final tuning, refining, bringing a fuzzy image into focus. So the picture is already there, but it's out of focus. So it needs to be completed by being brought fully into focus, I guess. Maybe that's a better way to put that.
I mean, you could see it or even in addition to that, you could see it as an image of a child being born still has, well, we don't know what the lifespan was in Eden, but let's say we were mortal but immortal in the sense of partaking of the tree and stuff like that. But you still haven't had a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old hasn't had the experience of a 50-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that kind of progression. It's not that it's incomplete, like you were saying, and I was trying to say, it's not that it's incomplete. It's just unactualized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like, so you're, just because you're 5, you'll live to see 50, but that comes with the experiences of ages 6 to 49 that are kind of the whole part of the journey. And so maybe it just means that the journey of life back then was, well, you just didn't live in fear of, didn't live in fear of death. You just lived in knowledge and in hope and in joy and in building stuff. But you probably still got a pain in your back from doing all the work God wanted you to do. So maybe there's that element too.
Maybe.
I don't know about that.
Well, you still had to till and subdue the garden.
How about good deep? Well, okay. Well, why 49?
Jamie, there's a difference between a hard day's good work where you can sit down and be like, the day is done, versus menial labor that ultimately a 9 to 5 is not fulfilling. But
no, it was perfect. It means they didn't ever even get tired. It means they were made out of titanium and they were immortal. Well, I think that's an interesting question about what would it look like if they hadn't disobeyed, because I don't think they had to disobey. So obviously what you're saying is there was something to be gained still, but they weren't. What does perfect mean, right? Some guy wrote a book about that, probably.
Yeah, sounds like a bum.
Some perfectionist, some sinless perfectionist. He wants to make everybody work for their salvation.
Works-based perfectionist.
Works-based perfectionist. Yeah, I'm reading that book. I'll have it on you.
Right.
Or the first. Oh, 1st of February. No, it's easy. It's like it's not that long, is what I mean.
No, it's, if you actually break it down, I think everything combined it's 150 pages, but it's actually like 115 pages of actual text.
I love the format, by the way. I think it looks really good.
Yeah, Whiff and Stock is really cool. It's like, I'd love to publish with bigger, quote unquote, bigger publishers, but I like the way their books look. And so I'm like, I have a few book ideas. I'm still, a couple manuscripts I'm kicking around, plus the dissertation. So, but I like the way they do stuff. They're really cool people over there.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'll have to keep that in mind because I've got a couple book ideas that I'm going to be working on, and I probably will end up turning my thesis and dissertations into books at some point too.
Mm-hmm. Just don't expect to make a lot of money off it, but that's not why we do it anyway.
I wouldn't expect to make anything off of it at all. It's just writing for the love of what I'm writing about. That would be
my writing assignment was I had to write. What was it? It was I forget. I think that's what I ended up choosing. It was 6. It was like why I had to write a thesis on something like I didn't agree with. So it was like why did like the women's suffragette or whatever thing, like why is that a bad idea, or like why women voting or something. It was like why it would have been better for women, or like the other one. No, the one I actually did was why capitalism is like wrong or something stupid like that, or I forget what it was, but I got a C-, so it's not very memorable.
I'm wondering why you didn't write about why we should have bacon for breakfast. That's what I'm wondering.
My professor was younger than me, so
I mean, I just imagine Jamie and me
Shoot.
sitting down to eat breakfast, and Boss is, of course, there, but Boss is having a real conversation with someone else, and me and Jamie are duding back and forth, and it literally turns into the conversation from Pulp Fiction at the end, where Jules and Vincent are talking about why one doesn't eat swine, and pig's a filthy animal, and it's a 10-minute scene where you're laughing. Would you eat a dog? Well, I wouldn't consider a dog to be filthy, but certainly dirty. You know, like, so it's like it's only a dude could argue this way, and Boss is sitting there like, yeah, I'll let them argue about this. Well, pig's a filthy animal, but can filth taste good? You know, like, what's wrong with filth? You know,
pigs are filthy.
I'll be sitting there just shaking my head the whole time.
I've never seen that movie, though, just for the record.
Okay, so Pulp Fiction, the problem with watching Pulp Fiction now is because it's been parodied so much that when you watch it, you'll see it, you'll see what the joke was about, and the movie itself will lose a little impact. But it's in terms of structure and acting and writing, it's very fun to watch.
Dude, the guy. I'm sorry. Don't tell anybody. But I kind of watched every single movie the guy's ever made because his dialogue is so good. I can't stand it.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean,
yeah, I think his best movie is Reservoir Dogs, personally.
I knew you were going to say that because that's obviously the best movie. So
yeah, it's his best movie. He hasn't made anything great since Reservoir Dogs, although Pulp Fiction is still gotta watch it.
Let's see. Yeah, I will be sharing the link in a little bit. Nick, I want to give you a chance to just say anything you want to say from that you didn't get to say since you had to go last night. So do that.
Oh, I'm obviously right, and I know everything, and I have never said anything incorrect ever.
And CJ
I mean, the only thing I could think of was I forgot the guy's name. I still don't remember his name, but I sent the link to Boss and to Jamie. But I want to say it's Joe or Joel Lore, where he looks at desire in Genesis. You know, your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. And he argues based on 7 occurrences in the Dead Sea Scrolls that the verb shouldn't be translated desire. It should be translated as return. And I, for some reason, blanked on the reference because I went and looked at them. I'm having to do work in the Dead Sea Scrolls right now. But in every context, it actually makes a lot more sense. Instead of it being about desire, it's about a returning to something. And in the instance of Eden, Eve's desire is to return back to the Edenic state, but Adam, because he's manipulated the relationship and lied and done all that stuff, has different ideas. So I think it actually adds a great bit of pathos or tragedy to the scene, and that otherwise is kind of lost. Because you make it about desire, then you've created a bunch of weird hermeneutical issues that, just arise from the passage unnecessarily. And then you have the beautiful image too. I think, was it Boss, you and I talking about this? It's the language of Adam. You are dust, and to the dust you shall return.
Yep.
That sort of imagery as well. So returning back to you might say your source, but your source, or what? Source is not the right word, but y'all know what I mean. Return to your source, but the relationship or the return is one marked by peril, death, brokenness, subjection, which is, of course, and that's where the hermeneutical question comes in. Is this something to be perpetuated, or is it something that, we don't perpetuate? So, but yeah, that'd be the only thing I mean, there's other stuff I wanted to mention, but that was the one where it was on the tip of my tongue. And then I realized I would have to take us down a rabbit hole, and I'm like, that's too much to go down just right now, just time-wise. And the 1 Timothy thing, we can save that for another time. That's too long. I may just have, maybe I just need to do a video on women in ministry. I had an idea for like a 60-minute video where here's the 30,000-foot view of kind of a biblical theology case kind of thing that just looks at the text in a very quick manner, and then do another series where it's just, all right, here's 3 hours on this one text, except I'm not doing the Mike Winger thing where I tell you other people are wrong. I actually, all right, let's go in order what these words mean and what all this means, and just deal with it that way.
Well, we need to get the one that we were working on for my channel back up and running, because that was a good crew to deal with that issue. So that's what one of my plans is, to get that resurrected and get that scheduled and get that back on track.
Just give me a couple of weeks notice or a
Yep.
couple dates.
Hey, how you doing, Jared? Good to see you.
I'm doing okay. I've got we've got family worship coming up pretty soon for New Year's Eve. So I'll be busy for quite a long time. But I do have a question I want to ask, and I asked Nick a little bit about it, and I'd like both yours and Amber's input on it, because I am in very painful cognitive dissonance.
Mhm.
And can I just, is it okay if I kind of give a brief little background on it and then ask my question, if that's okay?
As long as
I'll be
Jamie
brief.
says that's fine.
Yeah, go
Well,
for it.
I'm afraid of Jamie, so I'm waiting for his approval.
No, if the boss says go ahead, so go
All
ahead.
right. Okay. Well, I in part lost my job at a Adventist university over this question. And it's well, there's a saying that says a moral value is something that you believe to be right regardless of your feelings. And I know I am opposed to women's ordination for biblical reasons, even though my emotions just drive me nuts on the question, because my emotions want to say it's okay, but there's a passage I just can't get past. And I've heard, I think I've heard all the explanations for it, and I still can't get past it. And Nick, I've heard your explanation on it, and it's very similar to what I've heard before. And I love you, man. I wasn't persuaded by your explanation. And so
Why though? I'm curious why, because I have a lot of people say I wasn't persuaded and then ask and I kind of get different answers. I'm curious.
And I want to be.
Well, I don't care if you want to be or not. For me, that's irrelevant. But I'm also not the. But
No,
just
I
so you
get
know where I'm
that. I
coming from.
understand that. I understand that. But I want to be, because I don't care whether you don't care or not. I want to be, right? Okay. So, I mean, and there's no hostility here. I mean, I really do. I want help. Okay. If you want to look at it that way. So I'm hoping Amber can help out here too. And trust me, I'm a nice guy, So it's the passage in Timothy. I think it's Timothy, when he says, and again, you know what I'm talking about, where he says, I do not permit a woman to teach, because man was made first, and then woman, and then Adam was not deceived, but Eve was deceived, right? And Nick, I'm familiar with your and I'm going to go back and look at it again. It's just I've been busy. Your argument seems to be, if I understand it right, that he's restricting this to the local situation with these local individual women who are kind of getting out of control because they are one way or another misbehaving. Is that more or less on the same page?
I yes, just with one caveat,
Sure.
just for nuance. If we look at the heresy of the other epistles like Colossians or 1 Corinthians, none of them match with this one, which tells me that it isn't isolated is not the right term, because I'm not saying it has no application, but this is the only time he's addressed something of this type of magnitude. And
Okay.
So that's why that would be my tweak to it a bit.
So, okay. Because it seems to me, and the part, and to address your question, why, right, is it seems to me that when he says, I do not permit a woman, that seems to me to be addressing a general class. And he seems to me, it really does seem to me like he's addressing a general class, a general set, like in set theory. And then and what seems to take it even further is when he appeals to the order of creation, that seems to reaffirm he's referring to a general set or general class of humans, namely women in general, not these specific women. And if Amber or you can help me see through that I would feel a whole lot better. But it just seems, based on, he says, I do not permit a woman. Maybe I'm missing, so I don't understand any Greek except like math. And he says, I don't permit a woman. And then he does it on the order of creation, which again seems to be women in general, and that seems to be universal.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the primary hang up I've got. That is what's holding me back. And I would like, and for me, it's gotta be, pretty solid. I need more than it's plausible. I need, you know what, he or Amber is right, more than just plausibility.
All right. Do you want to take a run at it first, Nick, or do you want me to go first?
Go ahead. I can wait. Go ahead.
You can fix what I break. How about that?
Is it okay if I turn my camera off now?
Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
I don't like my face.
Yeah. No, I enjoy seeing you. I like seeing you, but you turn your camera off if you're more comfortable. That's fine.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things that I want to kind of bring out, and that I think for me.
I promise I'm not sexist. My grandmother raised me, and I love chicks.
Right. No, I'm not. Okay. First of all, I want to say that I don't think that this is a misogyny. Like, I'm not accusing you of being a misogynist, Jared, at all.
Okay.
I think that there's a few things at play here that I don't know that I have heard very many people bring into the conversation. So I'm just going to bring it in, and then Nick can tell me I'm wrong in a minute. But there's a couple things that are happening. One of the things that happens in the Old Testament imagery is it's very metaphoric, and it's meant to give a replicatable picture that is reused over and over and over. And that is consistently happening with the New Testament authors pulling these reproducible imagery into the New Testament and recontextualizing them post Christ. Okay. But you've got, they're writing this, but all of these guys are Jewish guys, Hebrew thinkers writing in Greek. So as their Hebraic mind is translating itself into Greek, there's some interesting stuff that's going on thought-wise there, because Hebrew and Greek think differently. And so it takes it from cyclical, metaphorical thought to precise, logical, linear thought. So you've got a thought translation going on here. And then he's also going from Hebraic culture to Gentile culture. So you've got that translation. So you've got multiple avenues of translation of thought going on. And then in the context of Timothy, he's writing this letter to the church in Ephesus. And in the context of what's happening in Ephesus, and you've got the cult of Artemis, and that is a matriarchal religion. So you have women who are used to running the show. They are the bosses. They are in charge. They run the whole structure there. So there's not question of their competency. There's not question of and they wouldn't question the rule and the the automatic authority of a woman stepping up to speak. But when these women are either recent converts or the priestesses of Artemis, and the congregation is disappearing because they're converting to Christianity, so their influence is going away, the offerings are drying up, the temple is dying, and they've got to do something. So they will either just come in and try to speak, or false convert to come in and take over and try to speak. So you've got agents of chaos coming into God's laid out order of his gathering place with his people, which is against what the gathering space of the temple tabernacle church was intended to be, the place of peace and order, to commune and dwell with Yahweh, with God. And there are agents of chaos coming into that space. And so when he refers to the created order, he's not saying the male domination over the female, or the male headship over the woman, or the however you want to however that's been translated and thought about. He's going back to, no, we have equal levels of priest and priesthood authority. It's not male over female. It's not female over male. We're created in equal partnership. And so those of you who are disrupting that order need to sit down and be quiet until you properly learn the respect of the created order, of the equality that was said about in Genesis, of priest and priesthood co-laboring together. And that's what I think Paul is talking about when he refers back to the created order. Not male first, female second, not subordinate helper. The created mutual authority role of priest and priestess. That's what he's referring to. Not bringing in matriarchy, not bringing in patriarchy, not one dominating the other. You're violating the created order by one trying to dominate the other. Go back and reset to the equality of priest and priesthood, priest and priestess. So, and then Nick, you can fix what I broke there.
Let me ask one quick question. Is there
Okay.
any significance? I have the text on the screen. Who's the they? Who's the they? Because we have the singular here. She will be saved, child, but
those
if
are debated.
they,
And not to be crass about it, every single word of this passage is debated in the academic literature on all sides of, like, from the most fundamentalist to the most liberal. Like every single word of this passage is hotly debated. And I'm not saying that to make it more difficult. I'm just, you pick up any commentary, you'll see the footnotes get a lot longer when they get to this section. But the debate is the singular, she will be saved. So the sod's over in verse 15 through the childbirth, if they remain. So you go for a distinct shift from the singular figure, which is most likely the previous woman, which is Eve, and they will be saved, which is probably a reference back to the women mentioned in verses 9 through 12, with the women with the hair and the ornate stuff and all that sort of stuff. And so those are the women Paul probably has in mind there. I don't want to go off if Jared has a question for.
I do, but
Okay. I don't want to go too far. So feel free to ask your question, then I'll answer.
is it okay if I try and restate back to you what you said, so I kind of think I kind of clarify whether I have it right in my mind or not?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that's the way I was trained to think. So the women, this is what, Ephesus, right?
Right. This is Ephesus.
And they had, they had a female cult, matriarchal cult thing going on there.
Yep.
Was it possibly even like a prostitutional type cult, or no?
That is unlikely.
Okay.
There are cults, how do you say it? Female centric, not exclusively female, but female centric cults that did involve sexual activity, specifically, and that's probably what's going on in 1 Corinthians.
Okay.
You have the Dionysiac cult in that area.
Okay.
But here, I mean, you have more stuff about genealogies and like the myths and endless speculations, that sort of stuff, as we saw in chapter 1.
Okay.
So that's kind of what Ephesus or the Ephesian cult or Artemis cult was generally known for, but there's a lot to it, but that's just in a nutshell.
Okay. So, but anyway, what's going on here is it was highly matriarchal, and the women are used to calling the shots, and the women basically say jump, and everybody else says how high. Right? More or less so far?
Basically, yeah. Very
Okay.
basically,
I mean,
yes.
in broad strokes, right?
Right. Broad strokes. Yep.
And they're used to, yeah, like female headship in a way,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
Right. Uh-huh.
Paul, you are asserting, and I'm not debating one way or another. Paul,
Mhm.
you're asserting, is coming from mentally Genesis 1, 2, and 3, where you're asserting Paul has an egalitarian mindset for men and women.
Yes.
And he's saying, I want women to be in silence. He's saying, I want you to stop doing this female matriarchal headship stuff and reboot to the egalitarian stuff of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. So I don't
Mhm.
want the women teaching the men. And that's what he means when he says, I don't want the women teaching the men. This is a high context conversation, not a low context
Mhm.
conversation. So you have to kind of be there to understand what's going on.
Right.
I wasn't there, but you studied it more. And so the context is the women were teaching the men, telling them every little thing. And when he says the women will not teach the men, he's referring to this matriarchal, I'm telling you guys every little thing that's going on. And he's saying that stops. And we're rebooting
Okay.
to the egalitarian approach. Is that
Let me nuance that a little bit more for you. Okay. Let me kind of so in the Jewish mind and in the practice of synagogues and rabbis and teachers, a student would sit at the feet of their teacher until the teacher decided that they were ready to speak. So a student just sat in silence and absorbed. They followed, they listened, they watched, they observed, they copied everything that their teacher did, and they just learned until they couldn't do anything but say what their teacher had taught them. And so I think what's happening here is you've got brand new baby converts coming into the church, listening for 5 minutes and standing up, exerting their societal authority role and saying, now you have to listen to me speak. And they are bringing confusion and they are misleading people and they are leading people astray because of their uneducated teaching. So the problem is the uneducated teaching, really, is what it is.
By uneducated, you mean uneducated in the gospel, not that the
Correct.
women. Okay.
so?
Right.
Basically,
Uneducated in the gospel. So if I were to go into, let's say I were to go into a mosque and listen for 10 minutes and get up and try to give a Muslim sermon when I know absolutely nothing about Islam, I would be uneducatedly trying to instruct everyone in that gathering. And I have no business speaking until I educate myself. And that's
yeah.
the
So
same thing that's happening here.
basically, they were used to being the professor, and then they're confusing their
Mhm.
10 minutes of Google foo with an actual rabbinic degree and started teaching nonsense.
I think
Kind of.
what
I
we
mean,
need
in
to do,
part.
Jared, I
Yeah.
think what we need to do is to take this take the gender out of this conversation because it's confusing the conversation.
But no,
This
but I
isn't
think
right.
okay, but I think I'm
Uh-huh.
getting it. You know what I'm
Uh-huh.
saying?
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
making a good, you're persuading me. You're,
Because
you're,
yeah,
you're doing a
this
good job of persuading it. Well, what it is, again, I'm sure you understand, not everybody else
mhm,
does, but the
mhm,
difference between a low context conversation and a high
yeah,
context conversation.
right,
And
right.
I was missing all this high context stuff. No fault to
Mhm,
me, but
mhm,
there's a lot of cultural stuff from 2,000 years
mhm,
ago of Ephesus. I'm an engineer. How would I know this stuff?
right.
Right? I
No,
just apply
it's
logic.
right. No, and I think that's one of the things that because there's such bias against women in ministry, this is a part of this conversation that doesn't get brought in unless it's brought in by people who are then labeled as wrong, if at the very nicest, and liberals and heretics and
Well, it
other
doesn't
things
hurt.
at the worst.
Yeah,
So
well, it doesn't help that the individuals that I knew, or
mhm,
many, not all, but many of the
mhm,
individuals that I was exposed to, who
mhm,
were, because I'm down in the La Sierra area, La Sierra University, and
okay.
the Adventists would know it's a very
Mhm,
liberal Adventist area. Many, not all, but there were many who were in favor of women's ordination. That was the aspect of it. And many of
mhm,
them who were in favor of it were just wild liberals,
right.
just off
Mhm,
the chain. You know
Yeah,
what
La
I'm
Sierra
saying?
is its own. It's the Claremont of
mhm,
the
right,
seminaries, if you know what I
right.
mean.
Yeah. So, Jared, does this help your math too? Okay, let me give you this one more piece
Help
for
my
the math,
math?
and then I'll
Okay.
your mental math on this, right? Okay. We're gonna put in some more
You're
high
doing a
context
full-on
to this
Fourier
conversation.
transform and Laplace transform on me right now. This is
Okay.
Whoa.
So
amazing.
let's
Whoa.
okay, so I want you to consider this too. So, okay, one of the reasons why this is so very important to Paul, to make sure that the gospel is preserved correctly, because the early church is going to spend the next 400 years running around squashing all the heresies that come out of the confused teaching that's happening in Ephesus and Corinth and all of these 7 churches of Asia. So when you've got women like these women priests from the Artemis cult coming in, speaking before they're ready to speak, and they're confusing people, then you're getting the first 7 ecumenical councils of the early church, where they're trying to wrestle with and squash heresies about who is Christ, the nature of the Holy Spirit, how defining and figuring out the Trinity, what are the essential beliefs of the church. It's causing mass confusion that takes 400 years to clean up. And it just it is such a huge problem when you get these bad teaching ideas. They take root in people's minds, and they are almost impossible to squash. And so Paul is saying, squash the bad teachers, so these ideas don't take root and become a cancer in the church later. So silence the bad teachers, whoever they are, because Paul, if you actually look, rebukes a lot of men a whole lot more for bad teaching than he does women. And he names names. So he is vicious when he needs to be, but he is
Mhm.
egalitarianly vicious to men and women. So people overlook that little piece too.
Yep.
Paul is not afraid to call out bad teaching, because Paul understands that bad teaching is going to wreck the gospel and it's going to wreck the church forever. And we are still seeing the fruits of that bad teaching that was coming out of those first 7 churches. And that's why Paul is so viciously and strongly going after the bad teachers, male and female, to silence them so they don't make a mess.
Well, Amber, um, I'm 58 years old, and um, wasn't always an Adventist, but when I taught at, but I had, but my entire Christian life,
Mhm.
I'd been opposed to women's ordination only on the grounds of it was clear. Yeah, people, down here in La Sierra, people were saying, not everybody now, I have to be fair, but people were saying, well, this passage of the Bible is wrong. This passage of the Bible is sexist. We need to ignore that and do what's right.
Heresy.
Mhm.
Shame on
And
them.
and there were I mean professors who were getting in people's faces saying, if you don't acknowledge that the Bible is sexist, then you're wrong. I mean, they're getting in 19-year-old students' faces saying stuff like
Mhm.
that,
Shame on them.
and saying passages of the Bible are not inspired and this and that, and just so on and so forth. And I would ask people, if you show me from Scripture where um, women's ordination is, or you know what I'm talking about, where women's
Right.
ordination is okay, I'll change my mind on a dime because I'm just going to do what Jesus says. Okay.
Mhm.
And I lost my job from La Sierra University for kind of complicated. It's okay. The next job I got like a $20,000 a year raise. But yeah, it was okay. But I was told later that in part it's because I wouldn't go along to get along, even though they were all preaching, tolerance and love. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think you have managed to do what nobody else was able to do. I think you've persuaded me. And thank you. I
I'm
still have to mull it over.
mull it over. And
But
don't just take my word
Change your
for
mind
it.
now
Check
or you
it
lose
out.
yourself.
oh no, I'm not taking your word. I'm not sexist. I'm not going to believe you just because of your plumbing. I've been married for a long, long time. I know all about women. I ain't going to
No,
believe you just because.
I
No, no.
should always be fact checked. Everything I say should always be fact checked. I am
But
absolutely in first one to tell you go check me out and look me up because if I
that sounded a little
am
inappropriate, but yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah
Yeah.
that's
Let's
yeah well
me throw this in
anyway.
and you can respond, Nick. So Odin says, I don't like narratives. This is not a hostile person whatsoever. I don't like narratives being used to justify a position a piece of scripture negates, especially if it's direct. We don't know about Paul's mindset outside of what he shared. I think we should stick to what he says and not narratives. I'm not even sure what the context of that is, but
I mean, I wouldn't dispute that. The problem is when Paul uses narratives,
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
he
but
does with
Paul's
that.
inspired.
Yeah, which is perfectly fine. I have no problem. I don't think, I'm sorry, right in the middle of a yawn, Jared. Forgive me. There it is. I'm with you. I don't think the Bible's sexist. I don't think what Paul says is sexist. And if I did, it's like, well, then gotta believe it. I mean, not trying to be crass about it, but
No.
I'm just kind of like, oh, if that's what the Bible says, then that's what the Bible says, and that's my problem if I don't like it. But the issue, or not the issue with anything what you or Amber are saying, but just what I can't see if that's an Odin or Adin 14. I can't read it from here.
Odin 14,
Um,
Odin 14 seems like it
when
wrong.
Paul uses a narrative, for example, like a creation narrative or sequence, then the problem is compounded because we have to determine and interpret what he's doing with it. Because Paul won't, and this is the issue of intertextuality, right? When Paul
Mhm.
will echo back to Isaiah or the prophets or Genesis, you kind of have to go, okay, he's bringing something in, he's sounding an echo and ringing a bell in an echo chamber. But problem is we're not in the echo chamber with him. We read about the echo chamber, and so for us, we have to look at it and go, okay, how do we faithfully bring and understand what Paul is bringing to us? It's kind of like the way I see it is
Mhm.
Paul. If you're making a Thanksgiving meal, Paul presents us with all the ingredients and everything we need to cook it, but doesn't it basically says, all right, I'm going to go put my feet up, and you guys cook, and I'll eat in about 4 hours when you guys serve it. And so the process of interpretation is putting it all together rightly and making sure the cranberries are
Mhm.
over there or in the trash where they should be, and the ham has been fried up, deep fried, and we're ready to eat
And
that for.
thrown in the trash where it belongs.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Jamie. The turkey, the pork is thrown in the trash where it belongs. And so on and so forth. And so for us, it's the thing I tell folks is we're reading someone else's mail. The difference is it's
Mhm.
wholly inspired, inerrant mail that we're
Mhm.
now reading. And so I think Amber's points, I wouldn't dispute any of them. Um, yeah, I think at a macro level, that's kind of what Paul is doing. The fact that he names the men, the fact that we know the heretical teachers' names, Hymenaeus and Alexander, in chapter 1 tells us how seriously Paul took this to the point where he handed them over to Satan, so they might learn
Mhm.
not to blaspheme. And the only other parallel passage we have that's kind of similar language, handing over paradidomi, the verb, and Satan, and a person being handed over is the man who's having sex with his stepmother in 1 Corinthians 5, where Paul basically says, hand the man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh so that the spirit might be saved in the day of the Lord.
Mhm.
And so Paul's response to the men is in both instances, both in 1 Corinthians and in 1 Timothy, is to a modern mind, overboard. But for what Amber said quite rightly is the gospel's at stake. I don't have time to tap dance around this heresy that's literally destroying my church. Specifically, you have myths, endless genealogies. You have all these sorts of heretical teachings that, I mean, Paul calls it doctrine of demons and stuff like that, teaching doctrines of demons. And so you have Paul basically being like, yeah, if I don't nip this in the bud right now, this church will go under. And we're seeing that. I mean, you can see it in modern or mainline denominations. You know, people ceded a lot of ground on sexual ethics, for example, 30 years ago. And those who are conservative now within that denomination are having to actually have the fight about it, 30 years late, so to speak, And so we're in this interesting space where we're ironically having to argue like Paul in our churches for fidelity and faithfulness to God's word when, well, you got plenty of false teachers running around teaching matriarchal stuff, patriarchal stuff, perverse sexual ethics. Jesus was wrong. Moses was wrong.
The matriarchal stuff's the worst.
Oh, all of it's the worst, especially when
All
you
of it's
when
the
you try to
worst.
baptize it. Especially when you bring the Greco-Roman aspect of it, which is predicated on power. It's like I got no time for this.
Amber, I think I'm gonna have a good cry after this. It's like I'm serious. I can admit, but I'm gonna have a good cry. And there's a number of people I gotta go and tell them that I changed my mind, and they're gonna be. I don't know if they're gonna gloat or how they're gonna respond, but I've got a couple of female friends who are pastors who I've always treated respectfully, but they knew my position, and first thing I'm going to go is I'm going to go straight to them and tell them you were right, I was wrong. But anyway, thank you, Amber. Nick, you did a
I
pretty
didn't do
good
a
job.
thing. Don't say thank you to me. Say thank you to Amber. I didn't say a thing.
No. First off, buddy, Bucko, I will say thank you to whom I will say thank you.
Fair enough.
And you set the ball up on the T-ball, and then Amber came along and set it up for me. And you guys were real gentle with me, and I feel like you didn't throw the ball hard down the center. You let me hit it. So I'm not that bright. So I really appreciate it, and it really makes a difference. I feel like I've had a weight lifted off of me. So thank you very much, guys. And I'm gonna step out now because we got a whole lot of food and prayer and singing to go to. So I'll see you guys later.
See you.
All right.
Okay, bye.
Do you guys want to, like, how about this? Since he's leaving, do you want to let like one person come in and ask questions, or do you want to do that?
I was actually going to hop off and go watch Seinfeld and check on my passion fruit mead that I've got stewing downstairs.
Okay. Well,
it's from
it's
my first batch. I'm making passion fruit.
Okay.
Actually, it's technically passion fruit pear, but passion fruit pear mead.
Okay. Well, do you want to answer one more? I won't bring person in, but what would you say? Okay. So Charlie's like, I think he's educated, and he says, do we wash each other's feet, keep a widow's I wash people's feet. Keep a widow's roster, greet with a holy kiss. We need to understand everything. I'll put on the screen. Everything Paul is written for us, but not everything was written to us. I think he's saying, he was saying women don't have equal roles, but that's cultural, so we can change. Seems that's the impression I get from that. But then he says, some of Paul's commands were time and culture specific. The holy kiss. His orders about ordaining male bishops and deacons were also time and culture specific, not time and culture transcendent. What would you say to that?
I mean, on the one hand, I think there's aspects to this. I mean, everything Paul wrote is historically grounded. It's not like he's free floating and has a crystal ball when he writes his stuff. I on the one hand, I would affirm, that Paul is both specific and transcendent, because one, I don't think Paul excludes women from, and I don't like the phrase ordination, but that's just the term we'll use, from ordained ministry. There are gender specific or generally gender specific, claims in scripture, but that's not, and the difference is we think of that in terms of negation. It's like, but for example, if I walk into a room and it's and I'll just be crass, Amber. So I'm sorry. We walk into a cigar bar at ETS, and it's Amber and everyone else. And Amber, you know what I'm talking about. Usually, the language you say is "Hi guys." It's not that I'm not. It's not that I'm excluding Amber from the conversation, although some people were doing that, despite my attempts to include you. So sorry about that again. But that's just kind of how language works. You know, it's I walk in and say, "Hey everyone, hey guys." You know, it's not like I'm saying hi to only the guys. We understand the the language that we use. Even Amber.
Me too, man.
Yeah, you know, it's like
My lady friends, when I say guys, I include them with that. Sorry about that.
Well, I mean, it's like, but in Australia, I actually asked this. Mates for the Australian is, I think they say gender inclusive. So, I mean, you can call a gal that's a friend a mate. You can call a dude who's a friend a mate, like, just mates. And so you've actually seen, you've probably heard me actually, how's it going, mate? It's an easier way of saying it. So on the one hand, I think Paul will use specific language, but unless we interpret that specific language in an exclusive or negation, or in a way that's negating something, I don't see that we have to even go to that argument. And so for me, when Paul uses the language of woodenly in 1 Timothy 3:2 of husband of one wife, as an example, right? One could affirm that, yeah, that's what Paul meant to say. That's specific and transcendent, all those sorts of things. But Paul was, not intending to exclude women. He was using a generic example. And a generic example in that culture would be a man. But again, the fact that and this is a hermeneutical issue, I would love to see more work done, is when we see a positive assertion about something, we automatically assume that it's implicitly negative. So we make an assertion, for example, about, a man must be a husband of one wife, or I would render it something more like must be monogamous or married once. I think that's what the idiomatic phrase actually is representing, right? It's when we go husband of one wife. That means no women, versus, the man, or at least the person in this instance, must be married once to one woman for life.
Must be a monogamous.
Must be monogamous.
Family person.
And so it's not, and so you can see the issue is we take a positive statement, but we interpret it negatively or as a negation of other things. And so I'm like, I don't, that second implicit hermeneutical move is a problem, because you could say, even if you interpreted the phrase one woman man as referring to a man and only a man and eldership and stuff like that, that still doesn't get you an exclusion of women. Because last thing, what is first is the woman. Now, I should clarify. I'm sorry to interrupt you, lowercase e Elohim.
That is one demerit, but you had one to give.
Okay.
And
yes, Charlie, I do. Gune can mean wife or woman depending on context. I got you. I know that, and I've argued with it. I do think the phrase in the one woman man phrase in 1 Timothy 3:2 does refer to is an idiomatic set phrase that refers to monogamous. So basically a one spouse person, or a person of one spouse, basically. In this instance, wife is used. Because that phrase also is used elsewhere in the pastoral epistles in a reference to a woman who's to be a one-man woman, basically, no multiple spouses. And that's how Josephus and Philo use the idiomatic phrase too. It's an exclusion of polygamy and an affirmation of monogamy. And so in that case, if that's true, then the passage does not exclude women, but it would exclude women with many husbands or men with many wives. So that's how I would interpret the passage, just so folks can at least hear what I would argue, not me bringing up certain issues with interpretive issues within the passage. I just wanted to be fair if someone heard that and was like, wait, is Nick arguing that? I'm like, no, I'm pointing out an issue. But this issue, that's what I actually believe the passage is getting at. So anyway, I accept my demerit. I apologize.
Can I just jump onto what Nick said really quickly and just point out a grammatical feature of both Hebrew and Greek and a lot of modern languages that use the structure of masculine and feminine in language to distinguish between two different things has nothing to do with gender necessarily. It is a classification tool that is used linguistically to separate two objects. Now, it can sometimes mean gender. So sometimes the feminine form refers to a female, but sometimes the feminine form is used but applied to an idea. So if you're going to logically follow that out, in Hebrew, wisdom is a feminine word. And
so is
hope
sin.
is a feminine word. And there's a lot of ideas in Hebrew that are feminine, not masculine. They're feminine ideas. And we see part of what's going on in Proverbs and Song of Solomon is the play out of the masculine versus the feminine. But that has more to do like personification that we see from the beginning of Proverbs to the foolish, unfaithful wife to the end in Proverbs 31 of that picture of the ideal wife that's held up is a reflection of a Hebrew device using the feminine nature of the word wisdom to as portrayed as the growth of the woman is echoing what you should like maturing in wisdom. You start out as a young foolish person, but in moving forward in wisdom, you grow into this beautiful picture of completeness because you've matured. It is not primarily so gender is a side set of masculine and feminine distinctions in a lot of language. Spanish does the same thing. There's masculine and feminine in Spanish. Most of the languages that I'm aware of do that. There's not as many. English doesn't really do that. But most of the rest of the world's languages do. They have that gender distinction in them. We just don't understand it because we don't use it in English, and that's the only thing. Maybe a point of clarification, Nick, for people who aren't quite following the gender distinction there and the linguistically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but another thing too I want to ask is my natural reading is the they is Adam and Eve.
I think if I remember correctly, it is.
Is that not possible?
Um,
They're a team. The woman and the man are a team. If they continue in faith, they will be saved through having children. That is, God will keep them, not Artemis.
I mean, that's an aspect of the Artemis aspect of that is true to some extent. I don't, but the childbirth, I don't think it's childbirth in a generic sense. Like, because then you run into the issue of, well, not to be crass, but or to be cruel, but all the women Christian women throughout history who have undergone death through childbirth haven't been saved through it. So it's one of those readings where it's like, that's where some of the complementarian readings or the patriarchal readings, and patriarchal, I'm using it as a technical term, not as a slur. Just
right.
That's where you can see the interpretation kind of grinding against the rocks on the shore. If it's a boat, and you're kind of like, I'm like, is that really where you want to go? Because that creates a major ethical issue, and it also creates an ethical issue with justification by faith. And however you construct that, imagine being saved by having children, like that's justified by faith. Justified by faith through baby making is not a part of the gospel. And so, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I was going to say maybe this is like not hip to the sort of the comparative literature on this, and so it's taking too much of a what's the word? But I was just like, it seems like you could argue because he goes on to argue about the comparison of the church and Christ with the man and the woman. It's like, what is Jesus doing? He's making them one, right? Like we're the body of Christ, and so like I don't know. I'm stupid and it's fine, but it just seems like the teamwork of the husband and wife together will be kept by God in her giving birth to their children. They don't have to worry about some other God. Just like Jesus unites the church with himself through the new covenant. It seems like you could say, put your dependence on the head that is Christ in the team of the marriage. And so they are saved. That is the unit of the man and woman, but maybe that's just being way too liberal with the text. I don't know. Or like, I hear what you said, but
the issue would be, and it's not an issue like in a negative sense, but you do have the issue of the previous use of you have a really nice bookend with the women how they're described in verse 9. The respectable with with modesty and it's often translated as like mental soundness or something like that, but it means probably something more along the line of reasonableness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
those two
totally.
those two bookend very nicely, suggesting that the they, and it is grammatically ambiguous. Like I'm not saying
Mhm.
it's this or that. I take it as probably referring to the same women mentioned who are seeking mental, we might say, reasonableness of mind as opposed to a heretical state of mind. I think that's the case. But again, that, and when I said to Jared, still stands. Like I said, every word in this passage is disputed, debated, and written about. If you get to this section in a commentary like this one, the footnotes in this section get a lot longer and a lot bigger and a lot more technical, because every single word is debated specifically in verse 12. What does the conjunction mean? What does the being verb mean? What does the
Mhm.
prepositional in silence or quietness mean? What do these words mean? So it's a hard passage no matter how you slice it. I do object to people who say it's an easy passage. I'm like, if it's in English, then
Mhm.
yes. But that's still, last I checked, Paul didn't write in the King's English. He wrote in Greek. And the Greek language is far more complicated than the English smoothing out of a lot of it, because the English
Yeah.
translation has to do a lot of interpretation for you. And that's not bad.
Yeah.
That
Right.
But you can see here, the footnote there, discretion, right? The 5-word discretion at offering an alternative reading. If you get to it, anyway, I'm belaboring the point. But yeah, that's my sense of it. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means contextually, I think it probably refers to the women mentioned in verses 9 through 12 specifically.
I think you have a highly over-focused immediate context. You're over-focused on the immediate context, and you're terribly biased by your professors. And the greater context is the man and the woman as a unit, and so I reject your direction, and just kidding.
There
Appreciate
is
that.
something to be said, though. And I'd love to get, well, I'd have to go and do some work, but plaso in Greek in verse 13, Adam was formed first. Formed, often we
Mhm.
think of that probably as a reference to formed or made, by God, from
Mhm.
Adamah, right? Um, Curiously, and I'm going to check something real quick. Um, that verb can also be used to describe teaching or
Mhm.
being taught, or you might say spiritually or mentally formed. Um, and if that's the case, and that actually does fit context, both options fit contextually very
Mhm.
well, which is why I'm like, often the answer is more of a yes rather than an either or. But you can look at it specifically. God formed, the plaso is used in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, throughout Genesis 2. Um, but it can be used in the making of altars in Kings, in Exodus 32:4. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it or made it
Mhm.
with a graving tool and made a golden calf. So that's Aaron, the event with Aaron. Um, Job uses language of being molded, by God, which probably doesn't refer to his being formed or made, but probably something more along the lines of mentally formed,
Fashioned.
or taught, or mentally fashioned, or being formed by your mother and father, being taught.
Mhm.
Um, you can, and that appears throughout the Psalms. He who fashions the hearts of them all and observes all their deeds. So fashion or forming. So I mean, you can find both kind of readings of it being formed as in from dirt, or formed spiritually, mentally, or pedagogically. That's the term I was saying. Pedagogically, being
Mhm.
educated. And I think both readings actually make good sense and do fit the passage, and kind of get
Mhm.
us past the, well, Adam was made first, ipso facto this. It's like, well, no. If
Mhm.
Adam was taught first and formed first, then Eve, then you may have an implicit interpretive explanation as to why she fell into deception in the first place.
Mhm. Can I add
Sequentially, I should say.
yeah,
Sorry, boss. Go ahead.
this is great. Can I just say, can I add a thought to that? Because this makes me wonder about, because we spent all semester retranslating Genesis 1 over and over and over and over again. And as we were going through that a word at a time, we talked about, and then we talked about it again in Old Testament biblical theology, that the first 3 words in Genesis are Bereshit bara Elohim. Okay. And the word Rashit, we have through theological bias always unquestionably translated that as beginning. But you can also another major use of that word is head, like literally the head
Rosh,
on your
right?
body. Yeah, it's literally the idea of head. But it can also have it also can be used, and I have to go look up the sources, and I'll have to do that later because I don't have the stuff I need in front of me to do it right now. But it can also mean from the mind of. And so one alternative translation idea conceptually of Genesis that goes along with not disputing the beginning of the creation of the world as the event that started our reality, but also as it was birthed, created from the mind of God. And so that I think that would also piggyback with what you were talking about with this idea of taught versus formed. Like it would be to me it connects like this because creation is formed not only by God's hands and the speaking of the word, it is also birthed out of his imagination and creativity that brings that into creation. And so therefore that is instructing creation what he wants it to look like from his imagination. God imagined what he wanted the world to look like and then spoke that into reality. So it came from his head through his hands out into his creation there. So I think that to me intertextually that thought links thematically.
Yeah, and it's an interesting even either way you take it. If you take plaso as or formed as made out of the dirt, then you have an actual interesting reference to Eve also being made like Adam
Mm-hmm.
was made, not from dirt perhaps, but a special creation. So that's interesting. That often gets missed. But if it's about teaching, then you have Adam was taught first, or then Eve was taught, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and fell into transgression. And so you have a massive amount of unspoken stuff going on there, but all
Mm-hmm.
of it points to the breaking or the rupturing of the relationship that is solved in verse 15 if you take it Christologically. But
Mm-hmm.
she'll be saved through the childbirth. And then you could even look at 1 Timothy 1:15. This faithful word that is worthy of full acceptance, that Christ Jesus came into the cosmos to save sinners. So to save, same verb, sozo there, to save sinners, of whom I am first. Same protos as used in 1 Timothy 2:15. So and it's not to be crass, but if you allow the text to be biblically and theologically coherent, and you read it intertextually, that is to say that what Paul says in one verse, he doesn't therefore contradict himself later. Same thing with James, same thing with Jesus. You begin to see that sozo, or salvation, is common throughout the pastoral, specifically in, who desires all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. And then, to save yourselves and my hearers. And so, the one who's saving you and is calling you into a holy calling. And so, even if you take all that together, I think you begin to see very clearly that that the question is not about gender roles in church.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that. That cheapens the text, like saying James 2 is about not being mean to bums on the street. It's like, yeah, that's kind of maybe a little bit, but there's a whole mess of things going on in James 2 that are beyond just, oh, don't start bum fights at church.
It's about works-based salvation.
Yeah, of course it is.
And I have one quick question for Nick before he bounces out to go check on his mead down there. So, to what degree, Nick, do you think that our Western mindset of trying to always think of things quote unquote literally is strangling the life out of some of these texts because we can't get past they have to see the literal meaning of the word? And like, how much do you think that's affecting our biases towards seeing bigger pictures and connections?
It's a good question. I think I think an issue is that for Protestants, generally speaking, very generally speaking, we read Paul like Paul is a mechanic teaching us mechanically how to do mechanical things. And it's not to say Paul doesn't think mechanistically or coherently or rigidly or anything, or systematically is the dirty word, but I think, systematically is a good word. But if Paul is a narrative pastor theologian, and I think that's what he is, then Paul cares a lot about history. And history is often messy, but history always speaks. And so I think for Paul, and Jesus as well, it's often difficult to read the text in a way that it was meant to be read, because we want things to be simple. We don't want to be having debates. Some people like debates. I actually would rather us all just agree on basic things than just get on with my day, But I think a lot of us, a lot of the Western mind looks for an easy solution to complex problems. And rather than being uncomfortable or even allowing the text to challenge the questions you bring, the Western mind is often very arrogant on that front, because we come to the text and we expect the text to answer my question. Can this person be a pastor? Do we meet on this day or this day? Are we allowed to eat this food or this food? Do we do electric guitars or do we scream at the top of our lungs in church? Are spiritual gifts this or that? Blah, 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 blah.
No drums.
No drums. Electricity, but no drums. But, and you begin to see, like, we are uncomfortable with the text speaking to us.
Mm-hmm.
If the text speaks, if God has spoken, and he's spoken through Paul, he certainly spoke through Jesus, through James, through Moses, through Isaiah. If God has spoken, then our questions are at best secondary to what God actually has said. And I think we need to basically reboot our brains and go back to the text and say, all right, I have these 75 questions I want answered, but I would rather you teach me what to think and how to think than me demand the text submit to me. We don't do relationships like that, and no good relationship is like that, whether friend or married. We don't make demands of submission and subordination. We come to a relationship mutually with intent and integrity to learn and to grow together. And so I think we need to treat the text in a more holistic and, indeed, dare I say, holy way, and that applies to me too, especially, without making demands of the text, and instead letting the text make demands of us, and us to think more Christianly about being a Christian. And sometimes that means looking at narratives and history and seeing how Paul or Jesus or John used them, and being upset with how they use them to the point where we actually are willing to even submit to it. And that's the hard part. But last I checked, I'm not allowed to tell Jesus or Paul he's wrong. So I better take the time to understand what he says.
Mm-hmm.
On his terms, not mine. But Jamie looks like he wants to say something, so I'll be quiet. Go ahead, O Elohim, lowercase e.
I think that's true about everybody but James. Yaakov was maybe not meant to be in scripture, but no, actually, I think I'll keep James in there. Thank you very much.
I like James. I'm the only Baptist I know who's preached through James.
Good. Get him, Pa.
Should probably do it again.
I love it because he's so worksy. It's like to slap people around with it, but for their own good, because I love them, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no instigating bum fights in James. Yes.
Yeah, bum fights I think that's been declared illegal. You know what I'm talking about. And so, dude, that was excellent. Thank you. Now go make your little drink.
I won't be able to drink it for like 3 months. So I'm learning the spiritual discipline of patience.
Good. And
Happy New Year to y'all.
Yep. God bless, man. Thanks for coming.
Peace out, boss.
Happy New Year.
See you in May.
Tacos in May with Arthur. Even better. All right.
I'd sneak over. Well, I'm going to give you the last word
Okay.
because my cat's bugging the junk out of me, and it's really irritating me.
Oh.
I'm gonna cut her. I'm
I.
gonna cut her tail off and throw her out to the wolves. No, I'm kidding.
Oh. That's
Never.
mean.
Never. I love animals. Okay.
Can you hear feedback on my end? I'm getting a little bit of feedback
I do not.
occasionally. Okay, so it's just me. Final word. Wow. I would say that I think sometimes we get, and I'm guilty of this too, and I'm very much working on trying to unlearn this, right? So sometimes in our desire to understand the truth, which is admirable, and everyone should seek truth, our Western brains get too far into the left side of our brain and think that truth only is left brained. And we forget the fact that beauty is just as true in the right side. And actually, if you go back and look, there's a lot of the research that's been coming out in the last few years has debunked the solely left brain versus right brain, that's a false dichotomy, that actually the right brain governs most all of the function, and the left brain is a sub processor to the right brain. So we don't actually function most of the time in left brain. That just, there are personality leanings that make people more logical and whatever, but the 50-50 left brain right brain thing has been debunked. So the left brain is subservient to the right brain in functioning anyway. But when we get to that logic leaning side of us and detach scripture from the side of beauty and the inspiration of the spirit in which it was given, in story and vision and dream, which are none of them logic primary based, they're all inspired through the spirit and guided and crafted by the spirit, we can trust that that is also sufficient to teach us truth. So I would say try to open-mindedly embrace with your whole brain. Use your right brain, but take your left brain with you to understand the truth of the scripture in front of you.